shooting in Aurora. Now, to try to transform their grief, they went to court, where sometimes progress does happen when you file in court, but in this case, you want to talk about a rigged game, Senator? The game was rigged. A man had sold 4,000 rounds of military ammunition to this person that killed their daughter, riddled her body with 5 bullets, and he didn't even ask where it was going, and not only did their case get thrown out of court, they were slapped with $200,000 in court fees because of the way that the NRA gets its way in our Congress, and we take a back seat. It's time to stand up and pass comprehensive gun safety legislation as a nation.
I think the governor gave a very good example about the weaknesses in that law, and I think we have to take another look at it. But here is the point, Governor. We can raise our voices. But I come from a rural state, and the views on gun control in rural states are different than in urban states, whether we like it or not. Our job is to bring people together around strong, common sense gun legislation. I think there is a vast majority in this country who want to do the right thing, and I intend to lead the country in bringing our people together.
Senator, it's not about rural. Senator, it's not about rural and urban. Have you ever been to the Eastern Shore? Have you ever been to Western Maryland? We were able to pass this and still respect the hunting traditions of people who live in our rural areas. And we did it by leading with principle, not by pandering to the NRA and backing down to the NRA. And I have been
I don't think I'm pandering, but you have not been in the United States Congress.
Well, maybe
and you want to check it out. And if you think that we can simply go forward and pass something tomorrow without bringing people together, you are
Let me bring in somebody who has a different viewpoint. Senator Webb, your rating from the NRA, you once had an A rating from the NRA. You said gun violence goes down when more people are allowed to carry guns. Would encouraging more people to be armed be part of your response to a mass shooting?
Look, there are 2 fundamental issues that are involved in this discussion, and we need to pay respect to both of them. The first is the issue of who should be kept from having guns and using firearms. And we have done not a good job on that. A lot of them are criminals, and a lot of the people who are getting killed are members of gangs inside our urban areas, and a lot of them are mentally incapacitated. And the shooting in Virginia Tech in 07, this individual had received medical care for mental illness from 3 different professionals who were not allowed to share the information. So we do need background checks. We need to keep the people who should not have guns away from them. But we have to respect the tradition in this country of people who want to defend themselves and their family from violence. And there are, people are going back and forth here for 10 minutes here. There are people at high levels in this government who have bodyguards, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The average American does not have that and deserves the right to be able to protect their family.
Governor Chasey, you have an F rating from the NRA. What do you think about what Senator Webb said?
Yes, I have a good record of voting for common sense gun safety legislation, but the reality is, despite these tragedies that happen time and time again, when legislators step up to pass common sense gun safety legislation, the gun lobby moves in and tells the people they're coming to take away your guns. And they're successful at it. In Colorado and other states, the legislators that vote for common sense gun safety measures then get defeated. I even saw it in Rhode Island. So I would bring the gun lobby in and say, we've got to change this. Where can we find common ground? Wayne LaPierre from the NRA, whoever it is, the leaders. Come on, we've got to change this. We're not coming to take away your guns. We believe in the Second Amendment, but let's find common ground here. Anderson, when the NRA wrote to everyone in our state, when the NRA wrote to the members in our state and told people with hunting traditions lies about what our comprehensive gun safety legislation is, I wrote right back to them and laid out what it actually did. And that's why not only did we pass it, but the NRA didn't dare to petition it to referendum. I want to move
on to another issue which is in the headlines right now, another crisis-making headline. Secretary Clinton, Russia, they're challenging the U.S. in Syria. According to U.S. intelligence, they've lied about who they're bombing. You spearheaded the reset with Russia. Did you underestimate the Russians and as president, what would your response to Vladimir Putin be right now in Syria?
Well, first of all, we got a lot of business done with the Russians when Medvedev was the president and not Putin. We got a nuclear arms deal, we got the Iranian sanctions, we got an ability to bring important material and equipment to our soldiers in Afghanistan. There's no doubt that when Putin came back in and said he was going to be president, that did change the relationship. We have to stand up to his bullying, and specifically in Syria, it is important, and I applaud the administration because they are engaged in talks right now with the Russians to make it clear that they've got to be part of the solution to try to end that bloody conflict and to provide safe zones so that people are not going to have to be flooding out of Syria at the rate they are. And I think it's important, too, that the United States make it very clear to Putin that it's not acceptable for him to be in Syria, creating more chaos, bombing people on behalf of Assad, and we can't do that if we don't take more of a leadership position, which is what I'm advocating.
Senator Sanders, what would you do differently?
Well, let's understand that when we talk about Syria, you're talking about a quagmire in a quagmire. You're talking about groups of people trying to overthrow Assad, other groups of people fighting ISIS. You're talking about people who are fighting ISIS, using their guns to overthrow Assad, and vice versa. I'm the former chairman, Anderson, of the Senate Veterans Committee. And in that capacity, I learned a very powerful lesson about the cost of war. And I will do everything that I can to make sure that the United States does not get involved in another quagmire like we did in Iraq, the worst foreign policy blunder in the history of this country. We should be putting together a coalition of Arab countries who should be leading the effort. We should be supportive. But I do not support American ground troops in Syria.
On this issue of foreign policy, I want to go to
nobody does. Nobody does, Senator Sanders.
I want to go to Denebach, Senator.
Governor Chafee, you were the only Republican in the Senate to vote against the Iraq War. You say Secretary Clinton should be disqualified from the presidency because she voted in favor of using force in Iraq. She has since said that her vote was a mistake. Why isn't that good enough?
We just heard Senator Sanders say that it's the worst decision in American history. That's very significant. The worst decision in American history, I just heard from Senator Sanders. So as we look ahead, if you're going to make those poor judgment calls at critical time in our history, we just finished with the Vietnam era, getting back into another quagmire. If you're looking ahead and you're looking at someone that made that poor decision in 2002 to go into Iraq when there was no real evidence of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, I know because I did my homework. And so that's an indication of how someone will perform in the future, and that's what's important.
Secretary Clinton is questioning your judgment. Well, I recall very well being on a debate stage, I think about 25 times, with then Senator Obama, debating this very issue. After the election, he asked me to become Secretary of State. He valued my judgment, and I spent a lot of time with him in the Situation Room, going over some very difficult issues. You know, I agree completely. We don't want American troops on the ground in Syria. I never said that. What I said was we had to put together a coalition. In fact, something that I worked on before I left the State Department to do. And yes, it should include Arabs, people in the region. Because what I worry about is what will happen with ISIS gaining more territory, having more reach, and frankly posing a threat to our friends and neighbors in the region and far beyond. So I think when you're talking about the tough decision that President Obama had to make about Osama bin Laden, where I was one of his few advisors, or putting together that coalition to impose sanctions on Iran, I think I have a lot of evidence about what I would do. Senator Sanders, I want to bring you in here. My question for you is, as a congressman, you voted against the Iraq War, you voted against the Gulf War, you're just talking about Syria, but under what circumstances would a President Sanders actually use force?
Let me just respond to something the Secretary said. First of all, she is talking about, as I understand it, a no-fly zone in Syria, which I think is a very dangerous situation, could lead to real problems. Second of all, I heard the same evidence from President Bush and Dick Cheney and Don Rumsfeld about why we should overthrow Saddam Hussein and get involved in the war, I would urge people to go to BernieSanders.com, hear what I said in 2002. And I say without any joy in my heart that much of what I thought would happen about the destabilization, in fact, did happen. So I think the president is trying very hard to thread a tough needle here, and that is to support those people who are against Assad, against ISIS, without getting us on the ground there, and that's the direction I believe we should have.
But Senator Sanders, you didn't answer the question. Under what circumstances would you actually use force?
Well, obviously, I voted when President Clinton said, let's stop ethnic cleansing in Kosovo. I voted for that. I voted to make sure that Osama bin Laden was held accountable in Afghanistan when our country is threatened or when our allies are threatened. I believe that we need coalitions to come together to address the major crises of this country. I do not support the United States getting involved in unilateral action. I'm
going to bring you all in on this. Governor Malley, Secretary Clinton voted to authorize military force in Iraq, supported more troops in Afghanistan. As Secretary of State, she wanted to arm Syrian rebels and push for the bombing of Libya. Is she too quick to use military force?
Anderson, no president, no commander-in-chief should take the military option off the table, even if most of us would agree that it should be the last option. What disturbed people so much about, and I would agree with Senator Sanders on this, leading us into Iraq under false pretenses and telling us as a people that there were weapons of mass destruction there was one of the worst blunders in modern American history. But the reason why people remain angry about it is because people feel like a lot of our legislators got railroaded in a war fever and by polls. And I remember being at a dinner shortly before that invasion. People were talking and saying, oh, it'll take us just a couple of years to rebuild democracy. And I thought, has this world gone mad? Whenever we go, in contrary to John Quincy Adams' advice, searching the world for monsters to destroy, and when we use political might to take it at the expense of democratic principle, we hurt ourselves and we hurt our
Don't you want to use military force too rapidly?
I believe that as president, I would not be so quick to pull for a military tool. I believe that a no-fly zone in Syria at this time, actually, Secretary, would be a mistake. You have to enforce no-fly zones. And I believe, especially with the Russian Air Force in the air, it could lead to an escalation because of an accident that we would deeply regret. I support President Obama. I think we have to play a long game, and I think ultimately, when I talk about blunders, I think Assad's invasion of Syria will be seen as a blunder.
Governor Malley, just for the record, on the campaign trail, you've been saying that Secretary Clinton is always quick for the military intervention. Secretary Clinton, you can respond.
Well, first of all,
Well, yes, you'll be coming in next, but she was directly quoted.
Thank you. I've been standing over here for about 10 minutes trying. It's gone back and forth over there.
well, I am in the middle here, and lots of things coming from all directions. You know, I have to say I was very pleased when Governor O'Malley endorsed me for president in 2008, and I enjoyed his strong support in that campaign, and I consider him obviously a friend. Let me say, because there's a lot of loose talk going on here, we are already flying in Syria, just as we are flying in Iraq. The president has made a very tough decision. What I believe, and why I have advocated that the no-fly zone, which of course would be in a coalition, be put on the table, is because I'm trying to figure out what leverage we have to get Russia to the table. You know, diplomacy is not about getting to the perfect solution. It's about how you balance the risk.
Thank you.
And I think we have an opportunity here, and I know that inside the administration this is being hotly debated, to get that leverage to try to get the Russians to have to deal with everybody in the region to begin to move toward a political, diplomatic solution in Syria.
Senator Webb, you said as president you would never have used military force in Libya and that the attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi was, in your words, inevitable. Should Secretary Clinton have seen that attack coming?
Look, let's start, and I'm trying to get in this conversation in about 10 minutes. Let's start with why Russia is in Syria right now. There are three strategic failings that have allowed this to occur. The first was the invasion of Iraq, which destabilized ethnic elements in Iraq and empowered Iran. The second was the Arab Spring, which created huge vacuums in Libya and in Syria that allowed terrorist movements to move in there. And the third was the recent deal allowing Iran to move forward and eventually acquire a nuclear weapon, which sent bad signals, bad body language into the region about whether we are acquiescing in Iran becoming a stronger piece of the formula in that part of the world. Now, I say this as someone who's been 5 years in the Pentagon and who opposed the war in Iraq, whose son fought in Iraq, I fought in Vietnam. But if you want a place where we need to be in terms of our national strategy, a focus, the greatest strategic threat that we have right now is resolving our relationship with China. And we need to do this because of their aggression in the region. We need to do it because of the way they treat their own people. And I would say this. I've been waiting for 10 minutes. I will say this.
You're over your time.
Well, you've let a lot of people go over their time. I would say this.
You agree to be debated?
The unelected, authoritarian government of China, you do not own the South China Sea. You do not have the right to conduct cyber warfare against tens of millions of American citizens, and in a Webb administration, we will do something about that.
Senator Sanders, I want you to be able to respond. Pardon me? I'd like you to be able to respond and get in on this.
Well, I think Mr. Putin is going to regret what he is doing. I think that when he gets into that...
He doesn't seem to be the type of guy to regret a lot, does he?
Well, I think he is already regretting what he did in Crimea and what he is doing in Ukraine. I think he is really regretting the decline of his economy. And I think what he is trying to do now is save some face. But I think when Russians get killed in Syria and when he gets bogged down, I think the Russian people are going to give him a message that maybe they should come home, maybe they should start working with the United States to rectify the situation there.
Secretary Clinton, on the campaign trail, Governor Webb has said that he would never have used military force in Libya and that the attack on the U.S. consulate in Benghazi was inevitable. Should you have seen that attack coming?
Well, let's remember what was going on. We had a murderous dictator, Gaddafi, who had American blood on his hands, as I'm sure you remember, threatening to massacre large numbers of the Libyan people. We had our closest allies in Europe burning up the phone lines, begging us to help them try to prevent what they saw as a mass genocide, in their words. And we had the Arabs standing by our side saying, we want you to help us deal with Gaddafi. Our response, which I think was smart power at its best, is that the United States will not lead this. We will provide essential, unique capabilities that we have, but the Europeans and the Arabs had to be first over the line. We did not put one single American soldier on the ground in Libya. And I'll say this, the
American citizens did lose their lives in Benghazi.
I'll get to that. But I think it's important, since I understand Senator Webb's very strong feelings about this, to explain where we were then and to point out that I think President Obama made the right decision at the time. And the Libyan people had a free election, the first time since 1951. And you know what? They voted for moderates. They voted with the hope of democracy. Because of the Arab Spring, because of a lot of other things, there was turmoil to be followed. But unless you believe the United States should not send diplomats to any place that is dangerous, which I do not, then when we send them forth, there is always the potential for danger and risk.
Governor Mount?
Anderson, I think we are learning, Anderson, I think there's lessons to be learned from Benghazi. And those lessons are that we need to do a much better job as a nation of having human intelligence on the ground so that we know who the emerging next generation leaders are that are coming up to replace a dictator when his time on this planet ends. And I believe that's what Chris Stevens was trying to do. But he did not have the tools. We have failed as a country to invest in the human intelligence that would allow us to make not only better decisions in Libya, but better decisions in Syria today. And it's a huge national security failing.
Senator Webb, I want you to be able to...
Thank you.
Anderson,
This was not about Benghazi per se. For me, it is the inevitability of something like Benghazi occurring in the way that we intervened in Libya. We had no treaties at risk. We had no Americans at risk. There was no threat of attack or imminent attack. there is plenty of time for a president to come to the Congress and request authority to use military force in that situation. I called for it on the Senate floor again and again. I called for it in Senate hearings. It is not a wise thing to do, and if people think it was a wise thing to do, try to get to the Tripoli airport today. You can't do it.
Secretary Webb, you served in Vietnam. You're a Marine. Once a Marine, always a Marine. You served as a Marine in Vietnam. You're a decorated war hero. You eventually became Secretary of the Navy. During the Vietnam War, the man standing next to you, Senator Sanders, applied for status as a conscientious objector. Given his history, can he serve as a credible commander-in-chief?
Now, everybody makes their decisions when the time there is conscription, and as long as they go through the legal process that our country requires, I respect that. And it would be for the voters to decide, whether Senator Sanders or anyone else should be president. I will say this. Coming from the position that I've come from a military family, with my brother a Marine, my son was a Marine in Iraq, I served as a Marine, spending 5 years in the Pentagon, I am very comfortable that I am the most qualified person standing up here today to be your commander-in-chief.
Senator Sanders, tell an American soldier who's watching right now tonight in Afghanistan why you can be commander-in-chief, given that you applied for conscientious objector status.
Let me applaud my good friend Jim Webb for his service to this country in so many ways. Jim and I, under Jim's leadership, as he indicated, passed the most significant veterans education bill in recent history. We followed suit with, a few years later, passing, under my leadership, the most significant veterans health care legislation in the modern history of this country. When I was a young man, I'm not a young man today, when I was a young man, I strongly opposed the war in Vietnam. Not the brave men like Jim who fought in that war, but the policy which got us involved in that war. That was my view then. I am not a pacifist, Anderson. I supported the war in Afghanistan. I supported President Clinton's effort to deal with ethnic cleansing in Kosovo. I support airstrikes in Syria, what the president is trying to do. Yes, I happen to believe, from the bottom of my heart, that war should be the last resort, that we have got to exercise our diplomacy, but yes, I am prepared, Senator, to take this country into war.
Very quickly, 30 seconds for each of you. Governor Casey, who or what is the greatest national security threat to the United States? Well, I want to go down the line.
Okay, I just have to answer one thing that Senator Webb said about the Iran deal, because I'm a strong proponent of what President Obama, he said that because of the Iran deal, that enabled Russia to come in. No, that's not true, Senator Webb. I respect your foreign policy chops, but Russia is aligned with Iran and with Assad and the Alawite Shias in Syria. So that the Iran deal did not allow Russia.
Senator, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to respond.
I believe that the signal that we sent to the region when the Iran nuclear deal was concluded was that we are accepting Iran's greater position in this very important balance of power among our greatest ally, Israel, and the Sunnis represented by the Saudi regime and Iran. It was a position of weakness, and I think it encouraged the acts that we've seen in the past several weeks.
30 seconds for each of you. Governor Casey, what is the greatest national security threat to the United States?
It's certainly the chaos in the Middle East, there's no doubt about it.
Okay.
And it all started with the Iraq invasion.
Governor O'Malley?
I believe that nuclear Iran remains the biggest threat along the spread of ISIL. Climate change, of course, makes cascading threats even worse.
Secretary Clinton, the greatest national security threat?
I think it has to be continuing threats from the spread of nuclear weapons, nuclear material that can fall into the wrong hands. I know the terrorists are constantly seeking it, and that's why we have to stay vigilant, but also united around the world to prevent that.
Senator Sanders, greatest national
The scientific community is telling us if we do not address the global crisis of climate change, transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to sustainable energy, the planet that we're going to be leaving our kids and our grandchildren may well not be habitable. That is a major crisis.
Senator Webb?
Our greatest long-term strategic challenge is our relations with China. Our greatest day-to-day threat is cyber warfare against this country. Our greatest military operational threat is resolving these situations in the Middle East.
All right, we're going to take a short break. Do these candidates see eye to eye on an issue that is driving a big wedge between